Hello everyone and welcome to the Henchman's Memoirs. This week on Encounter Design we are going to be doing a higher level tier 3 or tier 4 boss battle encounter. The video is going to be a little bit longer because we are going to make a encounter for the 2024 Monster Manual Merilith. And we're going to be spicing it up as we do all of our encounters with dynamic terrain, relentless time pressure, and an intriguing twist on the monster's abilities that will make it memorable and engaging for the players. Let's face it, the Merilith stats from the 2024 Monster Manual are not an improvement over the previous ones. Monster Manual for 5th edition, she doesn't have any decent ranged attacks, she doesn't have any area effect attacks, she's got this teleport ability. Now it's a bonus action, so that's at least something. She can move around the battlefield a little bit, but it's just not up to the standards of the Henchman's Memoirs. So to make this encounter memorable and epic, first, this encounter is going to require a little bit of setup on the part of the DM. The Dungeon Master is going to have to build up to this big fight. So basically what we want to do is we want to impress the party with the idea that they're kind of entering the hell adjacent part of the dungeon. This is a throwback to the first Diablo video game, where you started to get down to these levels that you realized you were leaving the regular realm and entering sort of the hell adjacent dimension. So we're going to do that. As the party gets close to this boss encounter, we're going to set it up with a few minor encounters. Maybe the first one, the party just sees like a pool of blood, and it's got some sort of smear marks on it that show where the body was dragged off, or maybe there's some kind of handprints in the blood. They go a couple more encounters, and then they're gonna find maybe some demonic writing on the wall, or some pages torn out of a book with a bunch of abyssal writing on it. The next big thing they're gonna come across is maybe they're walking down a hallway, and on each side are these crucified adventurers who have been impaled and drawn and quartered and tortured to death and all this kind of stuff. And finally, they might come across some kind of a summoning circle in a room, right? And there's signs of battle in the room, and maybe the lines of the summoning circle are kind of smudged out to let them know kind of what they're in for, and to kind of build the sense that they are in the really scariest part of this dungeon. But the other important encounter that we're going to have to set this up is the players are going to encounter a lesser demon, a pack of hellhounds or something that do vile damage. So vile damage is a thing from 3rd edition that we're bringing over. The way to make it stats sort of for 5th edition would just be to say, when you take vile damage, it lowers your hit point maximum. The difference is to other things that lower your hit point maximum, you can't get those hit points back just by taking a short or a long rest or something like that, right? The only way to recover hit points lost to vile damage is magical healing, and it has to be in a place of sort of sanctuary, and someplace that's sanctified and hallowed, and people have been worshiping the gods of good in there, for 2 or 3 generations, right? So basically the temple or the chapel back at the town, back at Tristram, but nowhere in the dungeon, no spell. Maybe you could let full restoration bring you, make it so that those can be cured. It wouldn't cure them, but it would turn them from vile damage into normal hit point damage. But for a party this level, we need to have something that takes the heal, we can just heal our way out of anything angle of the story, and sort of throw a monkey wrench into that. So that's all just to set up this encounter with this type 5 demon. So there's an important moment where we're going to describe the party sort of coming into this room. And I've got a PDF linked in the description below. There's kind of a lot to remember when the party first comes into this encounter and we roll initiative. So I've written it all out in a PDF that you can kind of have as a checklist if you want to run this adventure at home. But so Esmeralda and her mentor and trainer, Rudolph van Richten, and Leibniz, the witch hunter, all come up these stairs. And I want to make sure that they're kind of coming up a stairway and this room is being revealed as they look out across and they see this space. So the order I'm going to describe what they see. The first thing I'm going to describe, all along the walls of this entire room, hanging from floor to ceiling, are all of these swords. Like hundreds, literally, of swords from every kind of type and description, even from outside your campaign world. I mean, there's scimitars and there's long swords and there's katanas and there's those swords from Final Fantasy and there's just everything you can imagine. And some of them are broken, some of them are half melted. You know, they all show signs that basically these are the trophies that the Merilith has from her many battles. The next thing I'm going to describe is her. I'm going to sort of describe this. You know, she's larger than an ordinary human. Even just her torso is larger than an ordinary human. And I'm going to describe her eyes that are like, you know, molten iron, and her green hair and her big silver crown. And I'm going to describe how as they walk in and we're about to roll initiative, she kind of sticks all 6 of her hands out like this, and 6 swords kind of fly off the wall and all land in her grip, and she does a kind of a flourish with the swords. I'm also going to describe in there that she has these motes of kind of tongues of black flame kind of orbiting over and around her head and stuff. Then I'm going to describe this blood pool, which is over here in the back and just kind of, you know, surrounded by skulls and bones and full of bubbling blood. And lastly, I'm going to describe around the room some more of those torture victims, right? And I know I've been using these sort of flesh blob minis quite a few times in counter design, but I just love these things. They're so creepy. But I'm going to describe these guys, you know, have had their guts ripped out and their tongues cut off and their eyes burnt out and everything else, but they're actually still alive. They're actually still moaning and kind of writhing in their impalement and their crosses and whatever else. And so I'm going to describe that, and then we're going to roll for initiative. So as soon as we roll for initiative, I'm going to describe that blood starts to flow kind of upward out of this pool of blood and hover in the air in kind of like this ball, in this orb of blood that's kind of spinning and slowly growing in size as this stuff comes up, right? I'm going to roll a d4, and we're going to start with our dynamic terrain. I'm sorry, we're going to start with our timer. We're going to start with our relentless time pressure. So I'm going to roll a d4, and then the environmental effect, even though, again, this is the time pressure, it's going to go off on the initiative of the environmental effect, which is count 10. So whenever that counts down, I'm going to go ahead and, you know, every round when I get to count 10, I'm going to move the die down, whatever I rolled. Let's say I rolled a 1. The very first round, when it gets the environmental effect, this orb of blood explodes outward in sort of like daggers of blood, and they fly everywhere. And the effect of those things is when they hit you, you have to roll a saving throw. Let's see if I have what it is here. I think a DC 16 Constitution saving throw, maybe. Could be Dex, and you could allow people to have cover. Maybe you put a couple pillars out here. But if they fail the save, they're basically targeted by a Dispel Magic on any ongoing spell effect on them. So, right, so if Leibniz has already cast Spirit Guardians at 8th level or whatever he's going to do, if Esmeralda has some kind of protection spell on her, even if it's just bless. But if it's, something more hardy than that, whatever it is, when this thing goes off, it dispels one effect, ongoing spell effect that's on them. The DM gets to pick, or maybe you choose it randomly. If Leibniz doesn't have any spells running on him, then he's going to, something that he's wearing or carrying that's magic is going to become dormant for 24 hours. So his magic sword is going to quit being magical, or his magic breastplate here is going to cease to protect him. But that's the timer, right? So obviously when that goes off, I roll another d4. Now you've got that many more rounds before you get pummeled by another one of these things. So let's talk about her abilities. As I said, the stat block for the Merilith is kind of a dud. She's reasonably good with melee attacks. Obviously, she gets her 6 melee attacks with her 6 magic swords. But she doesn't have any ranged or crowd control abilities or really anything interesting. And at this high level of play, that's really a yawn fest, because what you're going to do is you're going to get your tanks up beside her. You're going to keep your ranged fighters and your wizards kind of further away from her. And it's just going to kind of drag out into this sort of static fight. So we're going to give her villain actions, right? So every round on initiative count 20, she gets a villain action. The 3 I have in mind for her first villain action is the first round, about 100 swords detach from the wall and just swirl around her in a sort of hurricane of destruction. And we're basically just using the blade barrier stats. Anybody within 90 feet of her, DC 19 dex saving throw, or take 6d10 damage. And of course, or I shouldn't say of course, the other thing to keep in mind is that all of her physical swords do vile damage. So now all of a sudden the tank who was planning to just get up there and then get healed by Esmeralda maybe, or lay on hands or whatever it is, and just be able to tank all this damage from her, all of a sudden we've got a real problem, because there is no way to heal this damage from her. And we're still, I don't think the party wants to know what happens if their hit point maximum is reduced to 0 by vile damage. But definitely make sure when they have the earlier encounter with some sort of monsters that do vile damage, some lesser demons, definitely describe them as kind of, the wounds won't fully close, and they've got this kind of necrotic, sort of almost gangrenous look around the edges of the wounds and stuff. Look like it's already sort of necrotizing and everything. Just really give them sort of the creeps if you can, to describe the vile damage. So all of her attacks do vile damage. Now the Blade Storm just does ordinary damage. That's to kind of remind Van Richten and anybody else that's kind of a ranged fighter that they're part of this fight too, and they have something to be worried about too. She still has in 2024, she has the bonus action where she can teleport over here if she wants to. That's not nothing. But the second time her villain action comes around, we're actually going to take a villain action from the very next page of the monster manual, and we're going to give her a petrifying gaze attack. So the second turn on her villain action, in a, I guess, 60-foot cone, whichever direction she's looking, everybody in the cone needs to make a DC 16 Constitution saving throw, DC 17 Constitution saving throw, something like that, or they begin to become paralyzed. The only difference we're going to make, instead of you're restrained the first round that you fail, we're going to go ahead with slowed on the first failure. Okay, the second failure, you're restrained, and the third failure, you're petrified. So this just lets the party stay in the fight a little bit. We don't want to make this one villain action that overpowered, but we definitely want to make it a thing where it affects them and they've got to use some abilities to kind of make those saves or whatever they've got to do. So petrifying gaze on the second turn, and then the third turn, I think we're going to go with a thrashing tail attack where she kind of spins around and her tail lashes out like 15 feet. Anybody close to her, DC 19 strength saving throw, or they're knocked back 10 feet and knocked prone and maybe take 3d12 bludgeoning damage. So just a little something to try to do some crowd control and kind of push people back away from her during that turn. So those are her 3 villain actions. If she lives longer than 3 rounds, you could have her heal herself somehow by calling out to Orcus, and a blob of blood flies out and heals her, something like that. Or you can just cycle back through the villain actions where she goes back to the Blade Storm ability. One of the most interesting things, though, about this encounter that we think is going to make it a real sort of boss fight worthy of Dark Souls or Diablo or something like that is going to be our actual dynamic terrain. So you mentioned when they came in that she has these flames flying around her head, right? So the first time that she fails any kind of saving throw, it's not a selection or choice on her effect. Automatically, the first time she fails a saving throw, instead of her suffering the effect, one of these poor half-alive torture victims suffers the effect and is instantly killed. All right, so if it's a lightning bolt or if it's some kind of fire attack or something like that, then they scream out in pain and wounds appear all over them and they just kind of explode and fall over dead, right? If it's something a little more abstract, like a banishment spell or something that would affect the creature's mind or something like that, maybe you can just have the adventurer go into convulsions and kind of their eyes roll back and they spit out a bunch of vomit and stuff and then die. But each time one of the flames around her head goes out when this thing dies, and she effectively acts as if she had saved from that attack, right? So this is kind of a more interesting and visual way of having her have legendary resistances, which, if she's going to be a boss at 3rd and 4th tiers, she's going to need legendary resistances to solo the party, even if there's only 3 of them. But then this creates an interesting sort of situation. Esmeralda needs to decide, do I want to try to take these guys out directly, thereby removing her legendary resistance? Do I want to waste a round or 2 doing that, or do I just want to focus on her? So I would give them, I don't know, like a 8 armor class and like 15 hit points, something like that. And the party can just directly affect them to remove her legendary resistances. I would try to make sure, you might want a slightly bigger arena than this, but I would want to make sure that they're far enough apart that like they're not all lined up against one wall where she can just get them all with a fireball or something like that. You've got to move them out enough that the party sort of has to dedicate some actions to getting rid of them. So here's our idea for a memorable boss encounter against the Merilith that's worthy of sort of a Dark Souls, Elden Ring kind of boss fight. If you have a chance to use it, or if this inspires you and gives you cool ideas for your next adventure, hey, give us a like, give us a subscribe, and join us next time for the Henchman's Memoirs.